At my son's wedding, my new daughter-in-law raised a toast to me. In front of everyone, she called me a bitter, useless old woman. And I paid for half of the wedding. I didn't cry or scream. I just stood up, grabbed the black suitcase from under my table, and walked toward the stage. Follow my story to see what happened next, and let me know which city you are listening from. The ballroom glittered with 1,000 tiny lights, each one reflecting in the polished crystal glasses and silverware that adorned every table. Laughter and cheerful chatter filled the air, the scent of expensive perfume and roses mingling with the promise of a celebratory feast. From my seat at a small table tucked away near the service entrance, I watched the spectacle unfold. It was my son Liam's wedding, a day I had dreamed of since he was a little boy. I had contributed a significant sum to make this day perfect, half of the entire budget, in fact. Yet I felt like a ghost at the feast, an uninvited guest whose only role was to observe from the shadows. My gaze fell on Liam, standing beside his new bride at the head table. He looked so handsome, his smile as bright and genuine as the one his late father used to wear. A sharp pang of love and grief pierced my heart. He had his father's kind eyes and his easy, disarming charm. Seeing him so happy should have filled me with pure joy, but a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. The source of that anxiety was the woman beside him, Chloe. I had tried so hard to like her, to see what Liam saw, but beneath her polished exterior, I sensed a coldness, a sharp edge that made me uneasy. As the main course was cleared, Chloe gracefully rose from her seat, a flute of champagne in her hand. She was undeniably beautiful, her white dress shimmering under the chandeliers, her dark hair swept into an elegant arrangement. She tapped her glass with a manicured nail, and a hush fell over the room. She began her toast, her voice smooth and confident as it carried through the microphone. She thanked her wonderful parents, her bridesmaids, and Liam's groomsmen. She even gave a special mention to the wedding planner for creating her dream day. With each name she listed, the knot in my stomach tightened a little more. She thanked everyone, it seemed, except me. Just as I thought she was finished, her eyes scanned the room, a predator seeking its prey. They landed on me, and a slow, deliberate smile spread across her lips. "And of course," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt like poison, "I must mention Liam's mother, Eleanor." A few polite claps rippled through the room. Chloe let them die down before continuing. "Eleanor has been such a presence in our lives." The word hung in the air, weighted with sarcasm, my hands resting in my lap, clenched into fists. I knew what was coming. "She has taught me so much," Chloe went on, her gaze never leaving mine. "She's taught me so much about the kind of mother-in-law I never, ever want to become." A collective, audible gasp swept through the ballroom. The cheerful atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable tension. I could feel every eye in the room turned toward me, 260 pairs of them, burning into my skin. My cheeks grew hot with a shame so profound it felt like a physical blow. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. But Chloe was not finished. She seemed to relish the horrified silence she had created. She taught me that being controlling isn't the same as being caring. She taught me that bitterness can curdle a person from the inside out. Her voice grew louder, more venomous with each word. And most of all, she taught me that a useless old woman who can't let go of her only son is the saddest thing in the world. The final insult landed, and the silence that followed was absolute, a deafening void where joy had been just moments before. I dared to look up at my son. Liam's face was ashen, drained of all color. He was staring at his new wife, his expression a mixture of shock and utter horror, as if seeing her for the very first time. Chloe, oblivious or perhaps empowered by the devastation she had caused, raised her glass high. "So here's to new beginnings," she proclaimed, her smile wide and triumphant. "Here's to leaving behind toxic family members. Here's to moving forward without any dead weight." My first instinct was to run, to flee the room, the state, the entire country, and never look back. But as the wave of humiliation washed over me, something else rose in its place, a cold, hard resolve. I was not the same woman I was when my husband died. I had learned to be strong. I had learned to fight. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back. The scraping sound it made against the polished floor was unnaturally loud in the silent room, a crack of thunder in the still air. Every head snapped in my direction. I did not look at any of them. I kept my gaze fixed on Chloe, whose triumphant smile was beginning to falter with uncertainty. I bent down and retrieved a small, plain black suitcase from beneath my table. I clicked it open, then shut, a sound that seemed to echo through the hall. Holding it firmly by the handle, I stood up to my full height and began to walk, my steps measured and purposeful, directly toward the stage. The journey from my table to the stage felt like a mile. With every step, the only sound in the vast, silent ballroom was the sharp, rhythmic click of my heels against the polished marble floor. It was a sound of purpose, a sound of judgment. 260 pairs of eyes followed my slow, deliberate progress, their expressions a mixture of pity, confusion, and morbid curiosity. I kept my chin high, my gaze locked on the head table where Chloe's triumphant smile had completely vanished, replaced by a mask of wary confusion. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the stem of her champagne flute. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" Liam's voice cut through the silence, but it was thin and cracked with bewilderment. He started to rise from his chair, but Chloe shot a hand out to stop him, her eyes narrowing at me. I offered them no explanation, simply continuing my measured walk until I reached the small table that held their magnificent, 5-tiered wedding cake. I carefully placed the black suitcase beside it, a stark, somber object next to the joyful white confection. Then I reached over and gently took the microphone from its stand. Its cool metal was a grounding presence in my hand. I turned to face the room, but my first words were for Chloe. "Chloe," I began, and I was pleased to find my voice was perfectly steady, without a hint of the tremor that had shaken me just minutes before. "You gave a very memorable toast. You called me useless. You called me dead weight." I paused, letting my words sink into the heavy air. "The thing about being 70 years old," I continued, my voice calm and conversational, "is that you have a lot of time on your hands. You learn to pay attention, to observe the little things people think no one notices. And over the past year, I've noticed quite a few interesting things about you." I placed my free hand flat on the top of the black suitcase, a gesture of finality. "Things, for example, about what you were doing last night, while your future husband was at his bachelor party with his friends, celebrating the end of his single life." A flicker of genuine panic flashed in Chloe's eyes. She leaned toward the microphone on her table, her voice a harsh whisper intended for Liam, but caught and amplified for the entire room to hear. "She's a crazy old woman." A small, sad smile touched my lips. "Perhaps," I said, my own voice clear and amplified, "but I'm a crazy old woman with excellent eyesight." With that, I calmly flipped the 2 latches on the suitcase. They opened with a satisfying metallic snap. The room held its breath. I reached inside and pulled out the first item, a glossy 8x10 photograph. I held it up for everyone to see. In the photo, Chloe, still wearing the dress from her rehearsal dinner, was locked in a passionate embrace with a tall, handsome man. A man who was most certainly not my son. They were standing just outside the revolving doors of the Marriott Hotel downtown. The room erupted in a collective gasp, a wave of shock that was almost a physical force. "This photograph," I announced, my voice cutting through the rising murmurs, "was taken last night at precisely 11:47 p.m. Chloe's face had gone a ghastly shade of white, stark against her dark hair. Before she could form a response, I reached back into the suitcase and pulled out a second photograph. In this one, Chloe and the same man were walking hand in hand toward the hotel elevators, his arm possessively around her waist. They were smiling at each other with an intimacy that spoke volumes. "And this was taken 2 minutes later," I said, holding it up. I let the image burn into the minds of the guests before I delivered the next blow. "The man you see here is Julian Vance," I explained, my tone even and factual. "He's a married real estate developer from Phoenix. According to the private investigator I hired 3 months ago, he and Chloe have been seeing each other for the past 8 months." I saw Liam flinch as if he'd been struck. The timeline was a dagger to the heart. This wasn't a last-minute mistake. It was a calculated, long-term betrayal. "Mom, what is this?" Liam's voice was a choked whisper, his eyes wide with horror and disbelief as he looked from the photographs to me. My heart ached for him, for the pain I was inflicting, but it was a necessary surgery. I reached into the suitcase one last time and pulled out the third most damning photo. It was taken through the window of a hotel room, showing Chloe and Julian together, their intentions undeniable. I held it up, a silent, irrefutable testament to her deceit. Chloe finally found her voice. She jumped to her feet, her chair scraping violently behind her. "She's lying. She's trying to ruin us," she shrieked, her voice shrill with desperation. "This is all fake. Photoshop. She's just a bitter old woman who hates me." Chloe's accusations of fakery hung in the air, a desperate, final attempt to cling to her shattered illusion. I met her wild, panicked eyes with a calm that felt like ice in my veins. "Oh, my dear," I said into the microphone, my voice soft but carrying to every corner of the stunned room. "We're just getting started." I reached back into the black suitcase, my movements unhurried, and pulled out a thick manila folder. Bulging with printed documents, when I tapped it lightly with my fingernails. The sound amplified into a series of sharp, judgmental clicks. "You see, Chloe, you have a bad habit of leaving your phone unlocked when you visit my house," I explained conversationally. "My neighbor has a grandson, Alex, who is wonderfully gifted with technology. He was kind enough to help me recover some of your deleted messages and emails. It's amazing what can be found, even when you think it's gone forever." I opened the folder, revealing pages upon pages of printed text. "I have them all right here. Would you like me to read some of them aloud? Some of them are quite explicit. I'm not sure your parents would enjoy the details." That was the final straw. With a guttural cry of rage, Chloe lunged toward me, her beautiful white dress tangling around her legs. She was aiming for the folder, a wild animal trying to destroy the evidence of its crimes. But in her haste, her heel caught on the hem of her gown, and she stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the cake table and sending a tremor through the towering confection. "You had no right," she screamed, her voice raw and ugly. "You violated my privacy." "You gave up your right to privacy the moment you decided to lie to my son and use him for his money," I retorted, my voice hardening. I didn't even flinch as she glared at me with pure hatred. I simply lifted the first page from the folder and began to read. My voice was clear and emotionless, a simple vessel for her own treacherous words. "A text message from Chloe to Julian sent 3 weeks ago," I announced. I cleared my throat and read, "Can't wait for this wedding circus to be over. Liam is so boring in bed, but his trust fund more than makes up for it." A wave of horrified murmurs swept through the crowd. I glanced at my son. His face was a canvas of pure agony. I hated that he had to hear this, but the poison had to be drawn out. I continued reading. "Just 2 more years and then I can file for divorce with enough alimony to keep us both comfortable for a very, very long time." A sound escaped Liam then, a wounded, animalistic grunt of pain that tore through my heart. He sank back into his chair as if his bones had suddenly dissolved, his hands coming up to cover his face, shielding himself from the public humiliation, from the absolute destruction of his love and trust. Chloe's parents were staring at her, their faces pale with shock and shame. But I wasn't finished. I put the page of text messages down and pulled out another thick stack of papers from the suitcase. These were receipts. "Are these fake too, Chloe?" I asked, holding up a receipt from a 5-star hotel. "Did I make up the hotel bills from your weekend getaways? The expensive dinners for 2 at restaurants Liam has never even heard of?" I fanned the receipts out like a winning hand in a poker game. "What about the Rolex you bought Julian last month for his birthday? You charged it, of course, to the supplementary credit card that my son pays the bill for every single month." The guests were no longer just watching, they were judging. The whispers grew louder, filled with condemnation. I picked up a single pale blue receipt and held it high. "This one is my personal favorite," I said, my voice laced with irony. "A receipt from Tiffany and Company for $2,400 for a diamond bracelet. It's dated the very same day that you told Liam you were so sorry, but you just couldn't afford to help with the cost of the wedding flowers." The hypocrisy was sickening, and I let the weight of it settle over the room. Finally, I reached for the last set of documents. These were the most important. But this is more than just cheating and stealing, I said, my voice dropping to a serious, somber tone. I held up official-looking incorporation documents and bank transfer confirmations. This is about a company, a new tech venture called Innovate Dynamics, a company you convinced my son to invest $150,000 in just 6 weeks ago. I looked directly at Chloe, whose face was now a mess of tear-streaked makeup and defeated fury. A shell corporation set up by your lover, Julian Vance. A fraudulent company designed for one purpose and one purpose only, to funnel my son's money directly into your pockets. The revelation of the fake company and the stolen investment money hung over the room like a shroud. Liam was utterly broken, his face buried in his hands. Chloe stood frozen, exposed and cornered. The whispers from the guests had turned into a low, steady hum of condemnation. I gave them a moment, letting the weight of her financial treachery settle in before I reached back into the suitcase. My hand brushed past papers and folders until it found what I was looking for. I pulled out a small, dark blue velvet jewelry box. It was old and slightly worn at the corners, a vessel of family history. I held it up, then slowly opened the lid to reveal the empty, faded silk lining. It was a silent, damning accusation. This box, I said, my voice resonating in the quiet hall, used to contain my grandmother's sapphire necklace. I looked at Liam, my heart aching for this public dissection of our family's trust. It's been passed down for 3 generations. It's valued at over $12,000, but its sentimental worth is immeasurable. It was meant to be a gift for Liam's wife on her wedding day. I let my gaze drift to Chloe. It went missing 3 months ago, shortly after a visit where Chloe was alone in my house for over an hour. "You're insane," Chloe spat, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "I would never steal from you. You probably lost it, you forgetful old woman." "Wouldn't you?" I asked calmly. I reached back into the suitcase of sorrows and produced a flimsy piece of paper. A pawn shop receipt. "This is from Morrison's Pawn and Loan on 5th Street, dated 3 months ago." I held it up so those at the front tables could see. "It's a receipt for the sale of one antique sapphire necklace with diamond accents, sold for $3,500. A fraction of its worth, but I suppose you were in a hurry." To punctuate my point, I held up a second document, a crisp photocopy. "The shop owner was very helpful. He remembered the sale. He said you were charming. He also made a copy of your driver's license, as required by law for all transactions." That was the blow that finally broke through Liam's shock paralysis. He shot to his feet, his chair nearly toppling over behind him. His eyes, filled with a desperate, pleading agony, were fixed on his bride. "Chloe?" he choked out, his voice raw with disbelief. "Tell me you didn't. Tell me you didn't steal from my mother." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just stared at him, her guilt written all over her face. I gave her no time to recover. The surgery had to be complete. I produced a second, identical-looking receipt from the suitcase. "Perhaps you don't remember the necklace," I said, my voice softening with a dangerous sort of pity. "But surely you remember this." I looked directly at my son. "Your grandmother's wedding ring, Liam. The little gold band with the Irish love knot. The one I took out of the safe to show Chloe last Christmas." Liam's face crumpled. He whispered, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it, but the microphone caught every devastating syllable. The ring was supposed to be for our future daughter." The room let out a collective sigh of pity for him. The cruelty of this theft was intimate, a violation not just of the past, but of a future that would now never exist. "It was safe in my study, Liam," I said gently, speaking only to him now. "It was perfectly safe, until someone who had been given a spare key to my house as a sign of trust and welcome decided it was worth more as quick cash." Chloe began to sob, not tears of remorse, but of utter defeat. Her perfect wedding, her perfect plan had crumbled into dust around her. I turned my attention back to the wider audience, my voice becoming firm and clear once more. "But the theft of priceless family heirlooms was just the beginning," I announced, reaching into the suitcase and pulling out another folder. this one even thicker than the last. When a few $1,000s from pawn shops wasn't enough to fund your secret life, when it wasn't enough to keep Julian happy, you needed a bigger score, didn't you, Chloe? Please, she begged, the word tearing from her throat. Tears were streaming down her face now, carving paths through her expensive makeup. Eleanor, please, stop, just stop. Her desperate pleas echoed in the silent room, but it was too late. The truth had a momentum of its own. If you're as invested in this story as I was in that moment, make sure you follow along, because the next document I pulled from that suitcase was the one that truly exposed the monster she was. Ignoring Chloe's pathetic whimpering, I reached into the depths of the suitcase and pulled out the last thick folder. From it, I extracted a single official-looking document with a notarized seal at the bottom. I held it up. This, I announced, my voice ringing with cold clarity, is a deed for my house. The house I raised my son in, the house my late husband and I built together. I let my eyes find Chloe's. According to this document, I signed my property, my home, completely over to you last month as an early wedding gift. I let the audacity of her crimes sink in. A low rumble of outrage began to build among the guests. I must admit, the forgery is quite good, I said with a tone of mock admiration. My signature looks almost perfect. But you made one fatal mistake, Chloe. A rookie error. I tapped the date on the document. You dated it for May the 27th. A memorable day for me. It was the day I was in the hospital, under general anesthesia, having hip replacement surgery. I have the hospital records, the surgeon's testimony, and about a dozen witnesses who can attest to the fact that I was physically incapable of signing anything. Liam, who had been standing frozen in a state of pain shock, finally erupted. The sound was pure, undiluted fury. You forged my mom's signature on a deed to her house? He roared, his voice cracking with rage. That's a felony? What is wrong with you? Chloe's sobs intensified, but they were the calculated tears of a cornered manipulator, not the genuine tears of remorse. I was just trying to help, she cried, her voice pitching high with false sincerity, to make sure she was taken care of. I was worried she couldn't manage the property on her own anymore. Before her ridiculous lie could even take root, I cut her off by producing the next document from the folder. It was a listing agreement with a high-end real estate firm. Is this how you plan to take care of me? I asked, holding it up. By putting my house on the market next week, while Liam was supposed to be on his honeymoon with you in Bora Bora? I turned to the room, explaining her scheme in a calm, conversational tone, as if discussing the weather. The plan, I must admit, was rather brilliant in its cruelty. Sell my house out from under. When I protested, you would simply claim that I had agreed to it, but had forgotten, due to my advanced age and failing memory. After all, who would believe a confused, useless old woman over a concerned, loving daughter-in-law? The final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place for everyone. This was not just theft. It was a cold, calculated plot to strip me of everything I owned and held dear. But I had saved the most sinister document for last. I pulled out a multi-page form filled with dense legal language. But to truly control everything, a forged deed and a stolen inheritance weren't enough, were they? You needed this. I held up a forged power of attorney. This document, also bearing my expertly forged signature, gives you complete and total control over my finances, my property, and even my medical decisions. The power to sell my assets, to empty my bank accounts, and to decide whether I live or die. That was it. That was the final breaking point. Chloe's manufactured tears vanished, replaced by a terrifying, naked greed. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She's an old woman, she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound that shocked the room into absolute silence. She's going to die soon anyway. Why should she get to hoard all that money when it could be put to good use? A collective, horrified gasp filled the ballroom. Her own parents stared at her as if she were a monster they had accidentally created, their faces ashen with shame. She had finally said it. She had revealed the black, grasping heart that lay beneath the beautiful facade. I stood there calmly, the microphone in my hand, and let her vile words hang in the air. Then I spoke, my voice a quiet counterpoint to her screeching. And there it is, I said softly. The truth at last. I looked at her, the shell of a woman whose life was now in ruins. All this work, Chloe. The lying, the cheating, the stealing, the felonies, all for money that was never, ever going to be yours anyway. Her face streaked with ruined mascara registered confusion. I allowed myself a small, cryptic smile. You see, there's something else you don't know about me. Something fundamental. Something that makes all of your efforts completely and utterly pointless. The air in the ballroom was thick with shock and disgust. Chloe's ugly confession had stripped away the last of her credibility. But her greed was only half the story. The other half was far more insidious, far more personal. I reached into the now nearly empty suitcase and pulled out one last large manila envelope. This contained no financial records, no forged deeds. It contained the proof of her campaign of emotional warfare. To steal from a family, I began, my voice quiet but firm. You first have to isolate your target. You have to destroy their credibility and poison their relationships. For the past 2 years, Chloe has been systematically trying to destroy my relationship with my own son. I pulled a printed email from the envelope. An email from Chloe to Liam's cousin Megan, sent last September. I looked out into the crowd and found Megan's face, pale with confusion. I read the email aloud. Megan, I'm so worried about Liam. His mother has become increasingly controlling and paranoid since his father passed. She calls him constantly, questions his decisions. I hate to say it, but I think she might be developing dementia. From her table, Megan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I thought she was just concerned, she stammered, looking from me to Chloe in horror. I simply nodded and pulled out another document. An email to Liam's boss, Mr. Henderson, from a fake account she created, I continued. I read her toxic words once more. I am writing to you anonymously as a concerned friend. Eleanor Vance has been harassing the office, calling multiple times a day to monitor Liam's whereabouts. Her behavior is erratic and unprofessional. I looked at my son, whose eyes were wide with a dawning, sickening understanding. That's it, Liam whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. That's why he started treating me differently last year. Why he took me off the Henderson project. He thought you were unstable. The web was intricate, its threads stretching into every corner of our lives. I held up the next piece of evidence. And the most chilling of all, I said, my voice tight with remembered pain. An email to our family physician of 30 years, Dr. Evans. I scanned the room until I saw him, sitting with his wife, his expression grim, expressing deep concerns about my mental state, mentioning memory lapses and confusion, and strongly suggesting I be brought in for a psychiatric evaluation. As if on cue, Doctor. Evans slowly rose to his feet, his face etched with regret. Eleanor, he said, his voice carrying in the silent room. It's true, Chloe's email was so convincing, so filled with detailed, fabricated anecdotes. I called you in for cognitive testing because of it. I am so sorry. I gave him a small, reassuring nod. You were doing your job, Richard. You were deceived, just like everyone else. I turned my gaze back to Chloe. You were creating a paper trail of my supposed mental decline, I stated, my voice like steel. A foundation of lies to make your future thefts seem plausible. It was all a prelude to stealing my home, my money, and my dignity. I then pulled out my personal journal, a simple leather-bound book. You told Liam I insulted your dress at his Aunt Carol's party. My journal from that day reads, Chloe looks so lovely tonight. That blue dress brings out the color of her eyes. Aunt Carol, a formidable woman, stood up. She's right, I was there. Eleanor said nothing but kind things all evening. I explained the endless small manipulations. The time Chloe claimed my casserole gave her food poisoning, forcing Liam to leave our family dinner to care for her. The way she twisted my words, turning helpful suggestions into biting criticisms. She manufactured crises designed to make Liam feel he constantly had to choose between his mother and his fiancée, knowing he would always choose the woman he loved. Finally, I held up 2 last items. The first was a beautiful photograph of Liam and me, smiling at a Mother's Day brunch he had treated me to. The second was a screenshot from Chloe's social media, posted that same day. It was the same photo, but her caption read, "Spending the day treating my very difficult mother-in-law to brunch." It isn't always easy, but sometimes you just have to be the bigger person. That was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle for Liam. The public performance of her kindness against the private reality of her cruelty. He turned to me, his face a mask of profound grief and shame, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Mom," he choked out, his voice breaking completely. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I believed her. I let her do this to you. I'm so sorry." I looked at my son, his face streaked with tears of apology and regret, and my heart ached with a love that was both fierce and forgiving. "I know, Liam," I said softly. "I know." Then I turned my attention back to the woman who had caused all this pain, the woman whose entire world was collapsing around her. There was one final devastating truth to reveal. I reached into the now empty suitcase and retrieved the very last document that had been resting at the bottom. It was a single sheet of paper, a letter on the official letterhead of my attorneys. "You were right about one thing, Chloe," I said, my voice calm. "You told me I needed to get my affairs in order. You pushed me for months to update my will, to make sure everything was settled." I held up the letter. "So, 6 months ago I did exactly that. I went to see my lawyers, but not for the reason you thought." I unfolded the letter and began to read a single, crucial paragraph. My voice was clear and steady. "After a comprehensive review of all assets, including property, investments, and liquid funds balanced against all outstanding debts and liabilities, we regret to inform you that your total net estate is currently valued at negative $47,000. A confused silence fell over the room. The figure made no sense. I had always been comfortable, financially secure. Chloe stared at me, her mind clearly struggling to process the information. "The house," I explained, looking directly at her, "the house you valued at $450,000 has an outstanding mortgage balance of $390,000. I took out a second mortgage last year." The color drained completely from her face. "I used that money," I continued, my voice betraying no emotion, "to help pay for this wedding, and for the down payment on your new car, and for those lovely vacations you took, the ones you told Liam were paid for by your freelance work. He always insisted on paying you back, so you let him. All those temporary loans were just him giving you his own money back. The truth is, my checking account currently contains $347. All of your scheming, Chloe, all of your crimes were for nothing. You were trying to steal a fortune that simply did not exist." Her entire elaborate deception was built on a foundation of sand. She had been chasing a ghost. "But while I was at my lawyer's office," I added, letting the final piece fall into place, "I decided to use some of my remaining funds wisely. I asked them to do a little research into you, Chloe." I let my eyes sweep over her, a predator enjoying the final moments before the kill. "Your real name, for instance. Or should I say your legal married name? Mrs. Ethan Miller. It seems you forgot to mention your first husband, the one you never bothered to divorce." I revealed her history, a litany of crimes that mirrored her actions against me. A criminal record in Oregon for check fraud, identity theft, and most tellingly, elder abuse. "You convinced an 80-year-old woman with dementia to sign over her monthly pension checks to you," I said, the words hanging in the air like an indictment. "Does that pattern of behavior sound at all familiar?" I pulled one last, folded paper from my pocket. "Or maybe I'm just a crazy old woman making all of this up. Am I also making up this active warrant for your arrest for parole violation?" Just as the words left my lips, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the stunned silence from the back of the ballroom. "She's telling the truth." Two uniformed police officers, a man and a woman, were walking calmly but purposefully toward the stage. The guests parted before them like the Red Sea. The lead officer, a man with a grim expression, never took his eyes off Chloe. He stopped just short of the stage and spoke in a clear, official tone. "Chloe Elizabeth Davidson, also known as Chloe Miller. I'm Detective Ramirez. You are under arrest for multiple violations of your parole agreement with the state of Oregon." As Detective Ramirez read Chloe her rights and clicked the handcuffs around her wrists, the other officer approached my son. "Mr. Vance," she said gently, "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but since she is already legally married, Your marriage ceremony today is null and void. It is legally invalid. Chloe was led away, sobbing hysterically, a beautiful bride in a white dress and silver handcuffs. I watched her go, then calmly bent down and snapped the latches on my black suitcase shut. It was finally empty. I stood, took the microphone one last time, and looked out at the sea of shocked faces. I believe, I said, my voice resonating with finality, that this concludes this evening's entertainment. With that, I placed the microphone back in its stand, turned, and walked off the stage, away from the wreckage, and toward my freedom. 3 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, the silence in my home had transformed. For years, the quiet had felt like a weight, a heavy blanket of loneliness. Now it was a gentle, peaceful stillness, filled with the comforting tick of the grandfather clock in the hall and the chirping of birds outside my window. It was the sound of peace. The aftermath of that day had been a whirlwind, but a distant one. Chloe was quickly extradited to Oregon to face the warrant for her arrest. The local news reported on the dramatic end to the wedding, but thankfully they focused on the legalities of her previous crimes and fraudulent marriage, sparing us the indignity of having our family's deep personal wounds publicly dissected. Liam moved out of the pristine, soulless house he had shared with Chloe and was staying in a short-term rental across town. He visited me every few days, our interactions initially tentative and fragile, like two people learning to walk again after a terrible accident. We spoke of simple things, the weather, the garden, a book I was reading. We didn't talk about Chloe or the wedding, not yet. We were carefully, painstakingly rebuilding the bridge she had so systematically tried to burn. One sunny afternoon, Detective Ramirez paid me a visit. She didn't come with questions, but with a small cloth-wrapped bundle. She sat at my kitchen table and gently unwrapped it, revealing my grandmother's sapphire necklace and my mother's simple gold wedding band. Seeing them again, safe and real, brought a lump to my throat. They were more than just jewelry. They were my history, my lineage, returned to me. She accepted a plea deal, Detective Ramirez explained softly. A long one. But part of it stipulates full financial restitution to you, not just for the items she stole or the money she funneled, but for emotional distress as well. She also informed me that Julian Vance's wife, upon learning of his affair and the fraudulent company, had promptly divorced him and turned over all his financial records to the authorities. He was now facing a host of embezzlement and fraud charges of his own. The web had been completely unwound. That evening the phone rang. It was Liam. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant, "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner tonight. Here, I could pick something up." I smiled. "I'm making your grandfather's lasagna," I told him. There was a pause. "I never learned how to make that," he said quietly. "I thought, maybe you could teach me." And so we spent the evening in my kitchen, side by side. I showed him how to brown the meat, how to layer the noodles and the rich, creamy cheeses. We moved around each other with an easy familiarity I thought we had lost forever. The air filled with the scent of garlic and oregano, the aroma of 100 happy childhood memories. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he looked at me and saw me. Not a problem to be managed, not a difficult mother-in-law, but just his mom. As we sat down to eat, he finally said what we had both been avoiding. "Mom, I am so sorry," he began, his eyes filled with a deep, painful sincerity. "Not just for believing her lies. I'm sorry for letting things get so broken between us that her lies could even take root. I stopped listening to you. I stopped trusting you. That's on me." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "We both made mistakes, sweetheart," I said, and I meant it. I was so afraid of losing that I held on too tight. What matters is that we're here now. We can be better. Later that night, long after Liam had gone, I sat on my front porch, rocking gently in the chair that had been my mother's. The cool night air was a balm. In my hands, I held the cool, heavy weight of my grandmother's necklace. I thought about everything that had happened. I no longer felt that desperate, aching need to be needed that had defined my widowhood. In fighting for my home and my sanity, I had somehow found myself again. I am 70 years old. My bank account is nearly empty, and my house is mortgaged to the hilt. By most of society's measures, I should feel like a failure. a victim. But as I sat there, listening to the crickets sing their ancient song, I felt a profound and unshakable sense of peace. I was not a victim. I was a survivor, and I was exactly where I belonged.